want to thank everyone for coming to this session. It's called Take Back the Narrative, Disrupting the Current News Cycle by Powerfully Illuminating Your Story. My name is Kyra Kyles, and I'm the CEO of Wire Media, and some people know it as Youth Radio. And it's an Oakland-based media arts organization that serves Black, Latinx, and Asian American youth between the ages of 14 and 25. And in addition to the work that we do from our Bay Area headquarters, we have a national network with over 100 youth correspondents, and we produce music, documentaries, news stories, interactive podcasts, and zines. And we do it with a unique perspective that's sorely missing in the mainstream media. And I should know what's missing because I spent 20 years as a journalist, mostly for mainstream outlets, though prior to joining YR, I was editor-in-chief at Ebony, and I also worked as a media and storytelling program officer for a Black-led philanthropic institution in Chicago, where I'm from originally, but I'm here in the Bay now. And joining me today are journalist and Wire Media contributor, Sabby Robinson, and the amazing founding executive director of the Hidden Genius Project, Brandon Nicholson. So I'll start with Brandon. Could you share more about yourself and your organization, please?
Thank you, Ms. Kyra. Great to see you. Shout out to Chi-Town, okay?
Yes.
Kyra, Chi-Town in the building all day, and great to see you, Sabby, as well. Mauricio. Yes, the Hidden Genius Project trains and mentors Black male youth in technology creation, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills to transform their lives and communities. Someone earlier this week asked me what business we're in, and I'd say we're in the youth empowerment business. We're in the business of inspiring our young people, wrapping around them holistically. Certainly we leverage technology and business and different, programmatic levers to get there. But at the end of the day, we believe immensely in the potential of our young people, particularly our Black boys and young men, and work hard every day to try and help them achieve their dreams, recognizing that fundamentally that'll help us achieve our dreams, right? I think we're really proud of our most intensive program, our intensive immersion program, which is a cohort-based component where we've served over 270 young people through that component since 2012. It was our first ever program, and 14 cohorts now. We are serving young people spanning Oakland, Richmond, Los Angeles in those cohorts, and seeing some tremendous results in terms of our graduation rates, north of 95% high school graduation, 90 to 95% depending on the year post-secondary enrollment, and retention north of 97, 98%. So really happy about that. And then we have a number of verticals meant to inspire and engage young people more, you could say, sporadically, either through events or through community partnerships. And we also reach broader populations of young people that way. So girls and young women, young people across gender identity, racial, ethnic identity, et cetera, and are really proud to have a lot of great community partners. So through that programming, we've served nearly 7,000 young people. We're really excited about that. So that's a little bit about us. I know we'll talk more, but want to make sure I keep us on time, Ms. Kyra. So hopefully that's good.
Yeah, I was about to say, Brandon, you pushing the envelope right there. We got to cut you off. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's so helpful to know more detail because it'll set the framework for the conversation. So now we'll let Sabby chime in. She's got some very exciting, things that she's doing within her career. And of course, as I mentioned, it has a Wire Media affiliation too. So Sabby, tell us, a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Sabby Robinson. I'm actually an Oakland native, so I started my journalism career at Wire Media back when it was Youth Radio. And I really built up my newsroom skills there. Since I've done reporting on entertainment and then in the education field too. And more recently, I'm working at APM Reports, which is the investigative/documentary unit of American Public Media. We produce a whole range of investigative pieces, but I largely produce an education podcast where we focus on issues of equity and education. More recently, we did a series about how COVID has been really changing the education landscape, particularly in higher education, and then also a documentary exploring the experience that Black students had at the University of Missouri during a series of protests that happened there during 2015. I'll get into that more because I think that speaks to some of what we're going to be talking about in this session. But yeah, thank you so much for having me again.
We are delighted to have you, of course. So now that we've all been properly introduced, we're going to have a great conversation examining two sides of one coin, and that coin is the media. So side one is, what is it like to be a Black journalist working for news outlets, especially in this moment? And then side two is, what is it like to be covered by the media as the leader of a Black-led nonprofit? So I'm going to kickstart the discussion and then open up the floor to make sure we have time for questions. If you have questions, you can do it via the chat, or there's a little cool audio video way that you can join us and speak up. And if you want to be seen and heard, either way, we are happy to talk to you. So now let's get into it. I would like to start with this question. I'm going to start with Sabby. Can you share what the statement "take back the narrative" means for you?
A few phrases come to mind for me. I guess to me, it's really like reclaiming your identity, defining yourself, and like uplifting your community authentically. So, the history of communities being misrepresented, being tokenized, comes to mind. And in that process, I think today, when talking about, taking back the narrative, it's me as a journalist and other journalists, hopefully being able to help communities define like who they are.
Absolutely. Brandon, what do you think about when you hear "take back the narrative" from your perspective?
Well, Kyra, briefly, I think about just being unapologetic, first and foremost. It's really fascinating to be caught betwixt and between. I think even in what we've seen the last several months, right, where you can, say racism, you can say Black Lives Matter a little bit more. And when I say can, I just mean out loud without, getting people looking at you like you have three heads, right? That haven't been said. Even then, it's very challenging because so much of what I've learned about changing the narrative is about just shifting the perspective. So what it took to get some people, for example, to be willing to say Black Lives Matter was to see somebody die on the ground, right? Or some bodies, what have you. What we're trying to do every single day, I think, is say Black Lives Matter because of how brilliant and unbelievable they are, right? And because of everything they accomplish, because of all the things that our young people and our boys and young men, all the areas where they lead, all the inspiration they provide. I'm going to pause in a moment, put in so we can tap in on this later. We talk about Black folks in tech and Black young people in tech. And I had a really spirited conversation with some friends yesterday. You're seeing a lot in the news around TikTok, right? And, I just out now said, TikTok is getting this valuation potentially of billions of dollars. It'd be interesting to see what would happen if Black folks just left TikTok altogether. And the way Black folks left Vine, the way Black folks started pulling away from Snap once you could get some of Snap on Instagram. And it's never us, right? It's never because of us when it's the positive stuff, right? Like the stuff could be, our fault, if it's going bad, but we can't be the reason that TikTok is $1 billion company, right? Or that got IPO. It can't be us. But actually there's data bearing saying that it's absolutely us. And so shifting the narrative is just owning our space, not apologizing for that. And if you get to talk about where Black is an issue for other stuff, then you sure as heck are going to recognize our Black brilliance and our contributions as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. They often mine from our culture, but we don't get any of the valuation associated with that. So it's an excellent point. Sabby, just to, hearing some things, a lot of people talk about the media. They've done this to me where they talk about the media this and the media that. And I feel bad as a member of the media that I'm trying my best, but still the media has a bad reputation, especially within Black communities, and for good reason. So how do you feel your identity influences how you approach reporting?
I mean, I'm Black first and I'm a journalist second. I think that's something that I'm acutely aware of, but I honestly have to remind people in the spaces that I'm in, that's a thing. Because I think as a Black journalist, oftentimes we are perceived as, being biased or, having biases, when in reality, like we tweet something like, Black people shouldn't be killed. And then our editors like will go down our throats, even though that's not a political thing. And so I think my identity plays into my work when it comes to what stories that I'm drawn to as well. Like, I really think it's important when you're exploring identity to be incredibly nuanced and as detailed as you can when you are, speaking about historically misrepresented communities, and really take it upon yourself. Something that I take upon myself is to try to help communities like rewrite those harmful stereotypical narratives that have plagued them for so long. One of the stories that I wrote or that I worked on recently, the documentary about the Black community at Mizzou, it's called Black at Mizzou, and I worked with this producer, Lauren Brown from St. Louis Public Radio, and she was attending the university in 2015 when a series of protests happened, and the national news media really heavily covered it, but in a way where it was just kind of like, the protests happened and then, Black students were angry and that was about it. Right. And so when visiting the campus with Lauren, who was the producer that I worked with in St. Louis Public Radio, I realized with my other producers, like, Lauren's story was so powerful, and she really took us into how there was so much more to tell there. It was more about this really strong, resilient Black community of students and professors who had uplifted each other and taken care of each other and created this like campus within a campus. And so I think, my identity really plays into my work by me being really drawn to those stories, pushing for those stories in the newsrooms, because I think so easily working at a place like American Public Media, it's really easy to just, kind of skim past these, details, and then often misrepresent communities because we try to tell these like big picture stories and get lost, and in the works harm communities, particularly Black communities, by stereotyping and using biases and stuff. And so I think that's one way my identity really comes into play.
And I'm thinking now, like, we wish we could have all the Sabbies out here interviewing people. I'm sure Brandon would love to talk to you, hearing about you discussing nuance. So Brandon, tell me, I'm sure that, there's the blessing and the curse. You want to be covered, right? Because you want to get the word out of what you're doing and the impact you're having, but you also run the risk of having a conversation with a journalist who doesn't really have that nuance. Then the story you read is nothing like the discussion that you had. How do you, and I think Carl Ager, if I'm not pronouncing the name right, raised a question like about misinformation. How do you asset frame, or what do you do when you're having these conversations with these kinds of journalists who aren't like a Sabby? How do you deal with that so that you make sure that you get value and your organization gets value out of these encounters with the media?
Sure. I think first and foremost, there's a bit of a journey in terms of what it took for us to get to this point and have a level of confidence, because I think it starts with confidence in who we are, what we're doing, and us deserving to be able to tell our story. It sounds obvious or perhaps even weird, but you get so self-conscious. We're a Black-led organization. Every time we're speaking, I'm assuming people assume you give us $1,000, we're going to spend it on Jordans and rims. So like I'm always thinking. So sometimes you got to let that go and just be confident who we are. It took us, I think, really starting to make investments in our communication strategy. And of course, we have been working very closely with PJS Communications to be able to, do that work. And Precious Stroud is a tremendous leader of the organization. I know she's participating in this summit. A lot of it, the first step was just our strategy, understanding who we are. So before we could talk to the press and shape our narrative, can we just be clear about our mission statement? Can we be clear about our vision? Can we be clear about what we do? A lot of people know us, for example, as a technology organization. And if you see a news story on us, people will typically cite diversity numbers in Silicon Valley first and say we're raising students to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, and that will be the lead in. and then they go into our story, right? And we keep saying, yo, that's not us. So that's fine that they're going to say that. When we get to that point about truth, is just then dig all the way in and know who we are. So when we're having interviews, we always make sure, hey, make sure you have the mission statement memorized, staff, board, genius, participant, etc. If you're part of our program, that's what you do. Secondly, understand why we're here, that we're not here to build a pipeline, a tech pipeline to Silicon Valley. We're not here to try and solve these constructed diversity problems that are very much the product and byproduct of the leadership or lack thereof in many of these companies, that we don't exist to do any of these things. We exist for our young people to be empowered, to demonstrate their brilliance. We dig into data. So when I mentioned like that social media piece, I didn't just pull that out of the air, right? Nielsen has the data. And sure, the Oakland Post or Black Enterprise might write about it, but we understand sometimes you can rock with that. Sometimes people need to see it somewhere else. So like I said, I had that conversation yesterday. I had 4 Nielsen studies ready to go, and I just dropped the links, boop, boop, boop. Black people lead the world in social media engagement and early adoption of tech, et cetera. And so you can only discount and dispute but so much of that. But it starts with saying, with confidence, our young people are brilliant. They build every single day. They're not catching up to anybody. And pretty much any news story we do centers on that. And when you come with that energy, the questions start to bend that way. And it's hard for them to find B-roll and sound and copy that says anything but. But it starts with us knowing what we want to say first and foremost, and just keep coming back to pounding on that. And in fact, I'll drop the Nielsen links here if I can too, so you can see I'm doing that.
I didn't think you were making it up, Brandon. Why would you do that? But yes, we would love to see those links. So, Sabby, and things might have changed before, Black Lives Matter has this somewhat of a resurgence. I mean, it isn't a resurgence for us, but, for, I guess, the mainstream. How receptive are your editors now versus before about when you say something like, this needs more nuance, or this needs more context, or we can't go parachute into these communities and do this kind of slapdash reporting and run back here and think we did a great job? Are they receptive, or are they still like, yeah, we have to be objective?
Well, I think the great thing is, like, if we're speaking about objectivity, is that it is being challenged on a much more public scale. People are understanding that objectivity has, is something that has upheld, white men's perspectives. Like it just is. It's, I think people are much more, editors and people I work with are much more comfortable saying we need to be transparent rather than objective, transparent with our identity, transparent with where we're getting our, sources, transparent with where we're coming from. But when it comes to if they are receptive to me saying that we shouldn't parachute in, I mean, I think they are receptive, but it's so I understand the difficulty of the fact that so many communities and organizations are so wary of the media at this point, and aren't necessarily, because of that history, down to start building that relationship. And I think that is one area that where I think hopefully, I hate that it's the burden typically on journalists of color, but I think oftentimes we are more immersed in those communities and can try to help bridge those gaps between, if we are in one of these newsrooms, like I am, where I'm literally the only Black woman on my team. And I have found that while I'm reporting in the Twin Cities, the Black community has been much more receptive to me than some of the white reporters. And I think just finding those, it's I think they are receptive, but the issue really is just where can we start building that relationship? How do we do it right now? How do we start bridging the gap and the hurt and the pain, and telling these, helping to tell authentic stories, because I think that's just where we're still trying to figure it out. So yeah, receptive, but I don't think the receptiveness is necessarily the issue right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten that thing. I call it the Matrix Neo syndrome, where you're the Black journalist. So you tell me what the Blacks will say when we do this or that. I've gotten that, throughout my career working And I'm sure that there's a bridge to that from the, community organizer, nonprofit organization perspective that, Brandon, have you ever gotten that situation where someone who's never talked to you before, all of a sudden, someone breaks a window on Broadway and they're like, who we need to go talk to? Brandon Nicholson. Like, how do you kind of deal with that when someone comes to you to speak for, the Black monolith that they believe exists, but you want to talk to them maybe because of the media impact you could get, but you also know you're kind of in danger of being possibly tokenized. Like, how do you deal with that?
Sure. Well, I think honestly, existentially, our entire organization can be very much viewed as the ultimate check on the broken window kind of tap in, right? Just from the standpoint of anything happening in the space. And say, for example, technology or Silicon Valley, what's considered the tech industry as it relates to representation or diversity, right? That becomes, an opportunity or something that we should speak on because, latent within the latent assumption within just this logical thread is that what's missing is the competency of the people who are not being represented. And so thank goodness we're here, because finally we can be represented, because we're going to train and get these communities finally the competency they've been missing this whole time, which is the reason why they weren't there. Can't possibly be that they've been competent for generations and that the first computer I ever got was built by a Black woman named Jenny, who's now got to be 68 years old, right?
Wow.
Who's probably as many jobs, right? We've been engineering for generations, and then for generations, companies have been saying they can't find any. So if you want to talk about what's happening at company X, right? Don't talk to me. Talk to the, chief people operations person there. Talk to the CEO, because I can tell you, and I'm not just talking about HBCUs, I can tell you where to find some engineers. You don't have to go all the way to Atlanta neither. You know what I'm saying? We got people around the way who've been doing it. So, yes, I've experienced that, Kyra, on a number of levels over my lifetime. And I'd say, we almost are kind of this natural fit and at risk sometimes of promulgating that narrative if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention. And so we always use opportunities, especially if somebody's got to run something, right? It's really hard, and Sabby can speak to this. You pitch it, they took it, but you got to go back. Now they're expecting it to run. So, the dirty secret is, 97% of the time, they're just going to have to run it regardless and try and chop it up however they can. So if I'm not saying we need more diversity, if I'm just saying Black people been Black, we've been doing this, run that. Savvy's got to find a way to make that go, because 6 o'clock is coming up fast, right? Like, so if I know what my narrative is and I push that, that's the way to get our story out there, because once that commitment's been made, and they say, well, what do you think? But don't you think, sure, you should hire more. Go hire the people ready right now. We are not raising our young leaders to work at your company. We're raising our young leaders to ball out, whether they're going to work at your company, build their own businesses, or work with companies that understand how to recruit, hire, attract, retain, advance, and support. If you're not going to do that, then we're not interested in the conversation. Mm-hmm.
Listen, I hope everybody took notes on that, okay?
Precious told me that. Precious told me that.
Sabby, you were going to say something.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I just think that plays into two different things. I think as a investigative journalist, somebody who's given like years to do her stories, I have the privilege of building relationships with people like Brandon, whose organizations deserve like a lot of time to build relationships with and understand and get to know their mission, their efforts. And, daily journalists, yeah, they they're like 6 p.m., like deadline, need to get a quote, they're probably going to botch it. But I think still like those journalists, if you have a beat, like you need to be building relationships with the organizations that are experts in that, on your beat, who, are addressing inequity in housing, education, whatever, tech. So that when it comes to getting a quote or going to them and being like, can I speak to you? Like you already have that background knowledge, you have that relationship, you understand more of a framework, how you should frame those quotes by them and what they mean. And so you don't totally misrepresent them in a story. I also think it speaks to the issue of journalism right now. I think journalists are so like also adverse to using like too many words. I think we like doing like snappy little quotes, snappy little headlines, and then we'll use the term like officer involved shooting and instead of being like the officer shot this guy, and then use police speak or a term that might just like totally misrepresent the situation, but it's shorter, so it works for the headline or the quote. So those are just two things that came to mind when Brendan was talking about that.
No, that's a great point. And having been a daily reporter, I've been through that where someone sent me somewhere to get a specific quote and I couldn't come back without it. And that really puts you in a place of failure because you're not going to get diversity. You're going to get what is expected, which is often coming from an editor who doesn't have that framework. I'm just going to ask you both two more questions. And why? Because people are tired of me running my mouth. They've got questions. We've got, let's see, who is it? We've got two questions coming up. So I'm going to ask two more and then we're going to go to Q&A. So save these good questions. They will get on the forefront. So Brandon, from a practical perspective, and I know that you have the help of a wonderful organization that you're working with, but what advice would you give other nonprofits about interacting? I like what you said about your asset framing and kind of really forcing the story in this direction, but sometimes, it can still get misconstrued. If there was one piece of advice that you could give about how do you deal with the media as a nonprofit, what would be the biggest thing that you think is super important?
Well, certainly, if you will just allow me a little bit, just to share, we'll just, we
All
talk.
right, Brandon, I'm watching you. I've got my fake watch.
Come on, sis. Come on, this your boy. Okay. No, just for us, we've always had a bias towards action. We were founded in 2012. We were volunteer driven for 2.5 years. So we didn't have anybody taking a check. We didn't have infrastructure. We ironically had developed by that point the most intensive program you could find, meaning we had young people going 8 hours a day, but everybody teaching and mentoring had 8-hour jobs, right? The math doesn't completely make sense. I say that to say you could see then we were the mindset of the type of folks who wouldn't make deep investments in comms and branding, right? We were in that get it done, lean startup, scrappy, make it happen mode. We don't work it out, right? And at some point it did take an active shift to us for us to find ways to start making investments in communications, first internally, again, understanding our story, because it's going to help make for a better grant proposal, a better news interview, a better conversation with a community member, a community leader, and a funder. And so we started working with PJS and we just kept leveling up. Now today we have PJS and retainer, we have a full-time communications manager, we have a great online brand and social media. But I think the piece of advice is, especially for those organizations and our organizations, Black-led organizations, tend to be biased towards action. We tend to get into this because we want to see the work and happen. And we tend to be underfunded, under-resourced, under-supported, right? So you typically aren't coming in to get the check, right? Relative to if you were going to maybe do, be a VP at like Red Cross, right? So I say, keep that bias towards action and make one of those actions a very intentional strategy and process by which you can develop a very sound narrative that you feel fully confident about, about which you feel unapologetic, and about which you feel comfortable holding other people to, even if they don't work with or for you. People, my wife gave me a hard time because on live TV on the news, I had this brother anchor correct our name. It's the Hidden Genius Project. So I said, it's the Hidden Genius Project. She's like, why'd you tell them that? Because that's our name, right? And Precious told me that I get to make people say our name. Okay. So I think that's develop a clear strategy internally and a practice, and then use that. It starts to emanate and project and seep into everything we do. And then from there, you can find ways to then accumulate the resources and the support necessary to do more. But I wouldn't say, go to this website and learn all about social media, because what are you going to say on there? That can't be your first step. It's got to start with understanding your internal and base foundational narrative first for any platform, and then working from there.
Brilliant advice. I'm glad I let you keep talking because I will cut you off. You know that, okay? Sabby, let me ask you a question, because and I recognize that you're doing more in-depth work, but do you have a piece of advice you can share with nonprofit leaders here, how they can interact with journalists? It's not all on them, and I don't want it to sound like that, but is there a piece of advice you can give them as an insider that could help them maybe in some of these interactions, like maybe how to frame it, or how to build a relationship if there isn't one, so that they're not running down when they see something bad happening, trying to seek a reaction versus a proactive relationship?
I think first of all, I think when it comes to even just choosing what journalists to speak to, I think just do your research. I think, you can look at the organization that people are a part of and make a decision based on that. They're they're at Oakland side or they're at the New York Times, and you immediately have something about, who they are. But I think like right now, honestly, individual journalists are taking much more time building their individual brands and characters, which I think like historically hasn't necessarily been the case. And I think that's pretty cool phenomena. And so I think, yeah, just like doing your research, making sure that the work that this person is doing like will inform kind of probably how they will approach you and approach the work that you're doing, and will give you a sense as to hopefully whether they will, take time to understand your mission and like, what your goals are and everything. I think, I guess, I think Brandon spoke to this, but just like being super clear when you're actually talking to a journalist about like who you are, what you're doing, what the work is. If you do feel like you're being misrepresented, tokenized in the interview, like call them out for that. I think like, just be like, are you,
drag them on Twitter, Sabby? Is that what you're saying?
Don't drag them on Twitter. No. I was saying that is social media is a last resort, I would say, because
Okay.
you're gonna get what you want out of calling somebody out on Twitter. I honestly think the best thing to do is to, if you feel that in the interview, speak to them in the interview, talk it through. If if that doesn't work, you go to their editors. It honestly really helps going through the chain of command.
Right.
Like the channels, like I actually think, and then last resort is calling them out on social media for something they did. It is effective, I think, in like usually getting people to be outraged to
right, but not fixing. It's kind of a nuclear option.
Yeah, it's a nuclear option. And like if we're talking about building relationships between journalists and organizations, like that is the last thing that needs to happen. So
well, I had to bring it up, Sabby, because that is usually what people do, because you can do it.
No, it is. It's
acceptable. As somebody who lives not to get dragged, I get it. But I'm glad everyone here heard that. Oh, Brandon, what's that?
Well,
you're on
Sabby, I was just gonna say, is there an option? I'm so through, man. I'm just out here trying to do my best, Kyra. So, Sabby, is there not an opportunity then also to help craft the angle too? What I've learned is, so I can say, hey, I can either say, look, don't tokenize this, or I can say, here's actually what the data show. And if you've never had an interview with somebody who has access to this data, what does that mean? Because as a journalist, Sabby, like you need something to write about that somebody else hasn't written about. And so what I found is that actually helps the pushback too. The call out for me typically is just giving them a new angle. And that's why it's so important for me to have the research, because okay, I'm not just pulling this off the top of my head, which, if you're president, it's fine, apparently. But for us, we need data. So if I just bring it through, I'm saying you could write about this, the fact that, 6% of computer science graduates this past year were Black, right? But you have, so if you're talking about 1% engineers, don't ask what the Hidden Genius Project is going to do about it. Ask these companies what happened to the other 5%, right? And oh, that's right. That's something we could write about. Cool. And that seems even sexier than where we started.
No, I totally agree. I think, journalists are always coming into a conversation with a source, with their outline already done. They have their story. They have, what will probably be their headline. They know what sound bites they're looking for already, which is, something that I think is problematic, because then they will, fail to see other angles, other perspectives. But I think that's a super smart strategy. I think you should always come in also as a source with an idea of what, you want the story to be, or what you kind of want to make sure to really convey to the journalist. And outlining that for them, you could have, write the story about this. And then maybe giving them, an incentive if you think that hasn't been covered enough. As a journalist, I always ask my sources, what do you think what do you think I'm not asking you right now? What do you think what do you think is not covered? What do you think as a journalist we're missing? And I think that is the most valuable thing to ask sources, because I get the randomest idea, they give me things that I was not even thinking about. And I think that oftentimes also can more accurately tell, the big picture, and also bring to light stuff that nobody else was thinking of. So I totally agree with you, Brandon.
Great advice. So let's see. We don't want to lose our questioners here. I think Leticia was waiting and may have faded away. So Leticia, please come back. And in the meantime, and again, I'm going to work, correct me if I'm wrong, I do apologize. Louise Arteaga wanting to ask, what are the current narratives about Black-led organizations in the Black community in the Bay Area, and how can funders support efforts to disrupt those narratives? It's a good question. Brandon, do you feel like you can swing at that? Or maybe we can have our Mauricio Palma, would you be able to weigh in and help us on this one? And thank you again for helping to shape this panel and making
Kyra, it'd be great to hear your answer too, because you chose to come into this environment. So you must have had some understanding as well. Brandon, that's not how this works. You don't tell me how to do they do it. I'm the moderator. Do you understand this? Okay.
So,
I mean, all right. I'm going to go with and see if Mauricio, do you mind taking a?
Yeah, no, not at all.
I think,
thank you, Luis, I'm on mute. Can you hear me?
No, you're good now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Luis, thank you for your question. I think that the part that I will respond is the second part of your question. I think that there are several different efforts that have been built around the Bay Area to address the challenges that we face now, but before COVID. In particular, I will bring to your attention the Renaissance journalism effort in creating a Bay Area media collaborative. This media collaborative has brought nonprofit organizations led by people of color that are working to create a new narrative, elevating and amplifying the untold stories of people of color in the region. And we've had the good fortune to be able to collaborate with them on several different efforts, going from looking at issues of education, place where Sabby has done some work in, and looking at issues of housing, and also engaging organizations led by people of color in this space to deal with the census, which was the last effort. And to Kyra's question, we're always looking for ways to go beyond the press release training that often foundations like to do with nonprofit organizations to be able to facilitate the connection between journalists and stories in communities, to really reimagine how we can create stories that are based in partnerships. So when we bring nonprofit organizations, community leaders that are addressing specific issues, and journalists that are working broadly in the community, the question is not how do you go about telling the story of a nonprofit, but how do you address the story of the community? And can you work collectively to do that work? And Renaissance journalism, again, and I'll put the information on chat, and the media collaborative allow us to help reimagine that intersection. I would like maybe Brandon can say more, and Sabby can say more about the first part of Luis's question. Thank you, Kyra, for the opportunity.
Absolutely, and thank you for the response. I appreciate it.
And Mauricio, actually, this is the second piece I think is the most instructive because it ties into the first. The second piece of what you mentioned, the collaboration. We have a strong and rich legacy of community-based organizations, Black-led organizations here, folks leading organizations and initiatives, not just for Black people, which is 100,000% fantastic and okay, but really for all of us and leading the community. And we have to watch out for the hook. We have to watch out for the the shiny object, right? Where funders or other folks, even the media, say, well, there's so many here, there's so much competition. Okay, and there's a lot of need, number one, and there's a lot of resources in this area. We can't simultaneously be the land of milk and honey in the backyard of the valley and all these places where all this money is flying around, and yet all of a sudden there's not enough money to do what needs to be done, right, in our community, et cetera. And then you're talking about organizations, even some of the best, the platinum level organizations that are serving maybe several hundred, several thousand people a year based on what they're doing, right? And you've got millions of people in this region. And so I think part of that narrative is that there's a lot going on and there's competition. I think there's an ecosystem. I think there's a Black-led organization ecosystem here, right? That's been built in a way that's meant to address the need and lead and model for other communities. And we just have to keep holding people to that and stay collaborative, because it's the collaboration that gets the work done, right? And then it's the kind of this narrative around competition that creates the divisiveness that makes us think that we shouldn't possibly work together because somebody else might get those resources. And so for us, listen, if somebody wins, one of our partners win, we had a partner who we love apply for a major grant, and we applied for it and they got it. That was huge for us. And guess what? We get the program with those people. Now they got something. We get the program together. They ain't got nothing. We can't program with them. We can't do it. So we have to not fall for that trap. And I understand that the Black-led organization narrative, we're powerful. We are leaders here, and people pay a lot of attention to what we do and try and do it where they are.
Love it. Sabby, did you have anything to add as having grown up in Oakland? What did you think the narrative was? And in any way, did that shape your decision to be a storyteller and try to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from growing up in Oakland, and then also I lived in LA for a bit, and now I live in Minneapolis. Oakland, I think, is a very special place because that ecosystem is also so apparent to me. Like growing up, it really was. And there is a lot more collaboration between not just organizations, but like just on a very public scale, like with community members, with the public. I think just being a part of youth radio growing up, that open doors to other, organizations and opportunities in my life that I don't think is similar to other environments I've been in. I guess I just kind of had a question though, more so that was like coming to mind. I guess for Brandon or Mauricio, I don't know who wants to take this, but I guess I'm just curious, in your mind, just more so, I guess, on Brandon's point about how there can be this like narrative, there can be this competition that's in this divisiveness that's created. Do you feel like that has, like, what's been the media's role in creating that? And also how can we kind of make sure that we don't play into that narrative of competition and divisiveness? I don't know who, anybody wants to take that? I don't know.
You go first, brother, because I think sometimes I think that the way in which philanthropy is organized lends itself to the perpetuation of that competition. So I don't know that it's the media. I will not blame the media. I think that there is already enough blaming on the media. I would reflect and explore how philanthropy is organized and how we might reimagine the way philanthropy is organized to invite greater collaboration rather than to perpetuate that competition. I think it all boils down to the resources that are available and the way in which we think about issues in the community and who the partners are that can help us address those issues. So that's my response. Just knowing that Brandon might have much more to say than I can.
Mauricio, you gonna keep doing that? Mauricio will keep pulling my card. No, you hit it. That's it. My experience has been that the media, the lion's share of the time, is running the press release that the philanthropic organizations have already put out, right? So they're carrying the narrative that's being put out by the folks driving the dollars. And so as we work with funders and stakeholders, public agencies to shift that narrative, I think the media narrative comes along with it. Certainly, one of the most attractive devices is to paint like the organization, kind of the shining organization on the hill, so to speak, or the rose that grew from concrete, right? The only one.
The struggle narrative, right?
Exactly, and that's compelling, and I get it. If there's going to be a struggle narrative, and if that's got to be the rule, a lot of times we find ourselves trying to spell out other organizations. If we did something else, right? And my brother just commented, Ashanti is a master at this. He's one of the most, I think, humble and gracious leaders I've come across, willing to collaborate. But I find when we're at our best, we're spelling out our partner's name, and letting them know, hey, you're shooting us at the David Glover Center, the David E. Glover Education Technology Center. Can you at least make sure you capture their name? If it's a thing on us, can the B-roll capture their name first so people understand these linkages? Or, we're doing this international event in London and South Africa, and our partners are Oakland Natives Get Back and tech exposure and access through mentoring your team, and here's how you spell it, here's their website, and we have an opportunity to advance that, and we have so many great partners. So I think Mauricio did a great job, and yeah, he hit on the head.
And I will actually just jump in a little bit on that one, because I did work briefly in philanthropy. And one of the things that in Chicago that I think does parallel Oakland was there was a scarcity of resource for organizations led by people of color. And so it created this automatic vacuum of, if this person gets it, that means that person won't get it. I think one of the solutions is to do more funding in those communities, and to also look at how your practices are welcoming to different communities, or if you're getting out there as much to those communities as you are to others, or is it insider knowledge, kind of like we see in so many industries, like you have to know someone who knows someone, and sometimes, leaders of color are not in those circles. I gave specifically to organizations that were led by people of color. Their boards had to be at least 60% people of color. And because we made those restrictions, we forced the hand of, philanthropy to follow that lead. And so, not to suggest that that's the landscape here necessarily, but in Chicago in particular, we found that a fraction of the money that was going to nonprofit organizations was going to Black organizations, even though Chicago has a huge community of people of color. So I think, though, are we out of time? I don't want to mess up our, yes, Mauricio says, yes, we are. I love that he quietly nods. All right. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. This was a great conversation, great questions. I want to thank Sabby for coming, dropping the journalistic knowledge. I want to shout out Brandon Nicholson of the Hidden Genius Project. Do not forget the "the." And I want to thank Mauricio Palma for not only helping to shape the panel, helping us work on it, but also for weighing in and giving that really important perspective that, sometimes missing in these spaces, and we need that insider knowledge. So thank everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this fantastic convening. Thank you for sharing space with us.
Thanks for moderating,
Kyra.
Kyra.
Shout out to Ever Forward Club, Responsible Education Institute, all my people out here. Appreciate y'all. Oakland Natives Get Back, stand up, partnerships, collaboration.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
God bless. Good night, right? Bye-bye, everyone.